and loved. So I want the respect, not just the appreciation, because I will take advantage of and use things I care about.
It's not the silent,
But it's also
silent, no? I mean, it's just,
because I don't want the kids to be afraid. But I do. It is one of the paradoxes of teaching. It's supposed to, because if everybody's super casual with me, then when I say, please turn this in, or be here on time, they're like, it's cool, he doesn't mind. I do. Because I don't want to get that by my bosses. Yeah. Machiavelli was like a super big deal a long time ago.
When was it?
The 15 years. But now that idea of better be feared than love is like super old school. And it's not actually that like big of a deal anymore.
Yeah,
I hate those chairs.
they really don't fit anymore.
Yeah, it's really weird.
Yeah.
Like,
Why can't they just have one of these? Why'd have to make have to give it back?
I don't know.
It's not like all these people are
I super hate those chairs. I'm so glad I would have got rid of it. I had to not have it. Then have that. I think I like my classroom more.
this is our math class.
Yeah.
But isn't your
Everyone's like twice the size of
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
I like the blue better than my walls though. It's very calming, chill. My walls are like the color of that purple bulletin board. It's obviously super sunbathing.
Yes.
They really didn't change that either. Or put something else up. Whose room is this?
That's my room.
Okay.
My math teacher.
Do you enjoy that class?
This year, yeah, I do actually. When I understand, the teacher likes to help. That's why I like classes. It changes every year. That's why I don't know what I want to do when I grow up. Because every year can change on what I like.
Yeah. Well, so as you get older, you will find that you are better,
Yeah.
or you appreciate items, some things better than others.
I thought I really did not like math until this year. I liked it in 6 and 7, but I wasn't that good at it. I mean it was fun, but I wasn't good. And then this year, I'm good at it this year.
And what's the class called?
My math class?
Yeah.
Algebra.
Algebra. Yeah, I like algebra.
Yeah.
I am not as big of a fan of like trigonometry or calculus. And it's mostly because I didn't practice or dedicate enough like effort into it.
Yeah.
At the same time, I made choices, so it's like I choose this over that.
Yeah.
And math fell into the back burner. I was very good at social studies classes
Social studies.
in high school. Weird that I became a social studies teacher.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very weird.
Yeah. I was also good at science, but science starts building a whole bunch of math.
Yeah.
And then I didn't do a lot of math.
So the physics kind of broke down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, I like earth science, not physics.
So biology.
I like biology, I like geology, astronomy. But then, yeah, then they're gonna be like, oh, let's talk about all the numbers associated with this stuff. And I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
I just think it's cool. But I do okay with numbers when it comes to social studies centers. Like all the stuff that they're gonna be talking about today. I'm on it. I can answer these questions.
You can?
Yeah. In just like one sentence.
What is it?
Can the United Nations effectively lead global efforts to contain climate change and limit fossil fuel consumption?
No.
It wasn't like climate change, it wasn't like, because already it's in the floor.
Well, so we will say that the climate is always changing.
Yeah.
It goes through like cycles. And humans just sped it up to the point. So there are points within the cycles that are very volatile. And the same things can't live in the same places anymore. And we don't like that idea because we like living in the same places. And we don't like the volatility because we don't like the big storms, the hot weather, or the cold weather, or whatever happens. We're not suited for that. Like, human life is actually super fragile because, I mean, if you think about it, your temperature can only go up like 4 degrees.
Yeah.
And then you die. And it can only go down about 4 degrees. And then you die.
Yeah.
So like, too hot or too cold, we don't really like.
Yeah.
And then all of our food's based off of temperature and stuff like that. So, but the United Nations, they can't change anything. They don't make any rules that people have to follow. You can just
I
do
want
it.
to hear people
So,
talk about question too.
Yeah.
I want people to answer.
and then this one, is economic or political gain more important than government figures in protecting the environment? Yes.
Why?
Why? Because
Oh, yeah.
most politicians
Yeah.
care more about having their job and keeping
Yeah.
their job than
That's true.
protecting the environment. That's why they became politicians. There are very few people where, but an interesting way to answer this is by talking about how sometimes those ideas overlap. Yeah, so very interesting questions.
Does it like change every time?
The questions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who came up with these?
So what?
Who came up with these questions?
I have no idea. I just work here.
I just go to the school.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They said, hey, can you judge? And I said, yes. And they're like, which ones? I was like, that one and that one.
I had to pick 3 days. I picked Wednesday, Thursday, Friday.
Because you're doing
Booster club.
booster club.
And
Does this count as community service or club
Yeah.
activity?
Yeah, it counted as community service.
Cool.
Activity I already finished because I went to volleyball. So
Oh, yeah, and you travel, so
Yeah.
you get hours for the entire travel time.
yeah, so that was easy. But for community, I did 4 hours in spectacular.
Oh, that's cool.
They didn't give us any breaks and it was just set. Like and plus they gave, like they didn't give me like a comfortable place, so I had to self like this, like that, and be all like this, and then every time someone came, I had to scare them, and it was quite exhausting, and then I'd have a big headache. And it was fun because I was at the exit, so every time, and I was at the dark place, so everyone was like, oh yeah, it's over, it's over. And they'd look at me and I'd stay, and so they think it's like a statue, and then I'd like jump on them, they'd get favorites. And I've seen a lot of people cry. I don't know if that's scary, but and then the moms would notice me and they'd go.
Yeah.
And then I did Wednesday, which was 3 hours, and I did Thursday, which was 2 hours, and then this, I came at 7:30 and I'm gonna finish at 10:15.
Oh, yeah, right after this.
So I already finished my community hours basically,
That's cool.
but I'm hoping that it will roll over to semester 2. 'Cause
It
I
will
mean,
not.
It won't?
It will not.
Um,
Well,
I heard it was going to.
yeah, it does. It doesn't roll over to the following year.
Yeah,
That's what I learned.
yeah,
So, I mean, community hours, like, I think it's 25 for the year,
yeah,
recommended 10.
and then 15.
I really like the community service hours here. I think it's cool.
Yeah, last year they would give more things to do, like there was outreach.
Well, I mean,
You could still do
you
it,
can do it,
Yeah.
go for it.
but it was more like,
Structured and
you can do it at this time if you want, you can sign your, it was easier. This time you have to like go out.
yeah. Well, I asked my students in my cohort what they wanted to do. If they wanted to like plan a big thing, if they wanted to organize a thing, or if they wanted to just do it solo by themselves. And they picked solo by themselves, and I was like, cool,
Okay, yeah,
makes my life easy.
I don't like this stuff much.
You don't.
I don't. I don't know.
Oh, the blue one?
The black one. Because this one, if you do this and then this again. Ah.
I bet the people who are watching this right now,
Having the time of their lives.
yeah. Do you think they can hear us?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. I can see how many people are watching. No one's watching. But I've checked like right before, I've timed only like one person. Like that's the max I've ever seen someone do it.
It's just one person.
Yeah. And not a lot, I thought this people were gonna watch the forensics. That's like spectators and
Well, so
participants.
let's think about how many people watched your volleyball games.
Home or away?
Either one.
Home, there was people who came, yeah.
Okay, how many?
I don't know. I know
Would you say
lots of my friends came.
30?
I'd
Enough
say,
people to fill a classroom.
I'd say on those teachers versus students, yes.
Okay.
But then for, I think, yeah, no, a bit less than 30.
Okay.
It's because our school isn't much of, like, we don't watch that much.
Well, that's actually a thing that all schools struggle with.
No, but there's some schools where like, it's like, oh wow, American football, we have to go watch it.
Well, that's because it's a big event.
Yeah.
And like,
But like if we were to host our tournament like we did in Sasa's, girls, no one came to the opening ceremony. No one. You see the pictures? It's empty. Completely empty. For the opening ceremony. And then I was at Tazen and we did the opening ceremony and there was like a lot of people. They filled up the whole bleachers.
Yeah.
And same with the semifinals, they filled up the whole bleachers. I've also seen other schools that like, they care about sport, athletics. And I'm not saying that we don't care about athletics, but it's more of a, if I have time, I can go watch.
yeah. Well, and this school is way better than my last school.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
No one came to the games.
No.
Sad. When did they come? 45.
They should come around 45, 40. Yeah. I like it here.
ACS.
Jordan, ACS.
This is the most I've ever stayed in one country.
The most I ever stayed in one country, 6 years?
Yeah,
Mine was 5.
5?
Yeah.
Cause
So like in my whole life.
in your whole life?
Well, we'll go with not 5, not one country, one city.
Okay.
The most I ever stayed in one city was 5 years.
Okay, well, the most I've ever stayed in the city is 6 right now. And I'm probably leaving this year, because my brother's graduating.
Yeah. You guys going back to Europe?
I have no idea, we probably will go to Latin America,
Oh, cool.
but we'll probably know like 2 months before we go.
Which part of Latin America do you think?
We don't know, we might not even go to Latin America, but it's just a possibility.
I've only been to, so it depends on where you believe Latin America begins and ends.
Yeah,
So like, I've been to Mexico
mm-hmm.
once, and then I went to Peru.
I haven't been in Latin America, I think.
Peru was super cool.
Yeah, we might actually go to Peru. That was one of
It's
the goals.
really cool, and then the school there is fantastic.
Really? What is it, IB or?
It's IB.
Mm.
FDR. It is a spectacular school. You will be lucky to go there.
Did you teach there?
I tried. Like legit, I tried.
You tried to go to?
They didn't have a job for Mrs. Cisco, and they didn't even call me back.
No, that is very sad.
It happens. Well, I mean, if one of the things was when you're like 2 people are trying to get a job there, they're like, well, if I don't have a job for you, then why would I bother talking to
Yeah.
you? It does make it hard, but yeah, Peru is cool. The food's good. It's really interesting. Do you know what ceviche is?
No,
How do you feel about sushi?
I have a food disorder, so my taste buds are hypersensitive, so I'm very, very picky.
So you
So
don't like
no,
sushi?
Not sushi.
Oh, well, so ceviche is they take chunks of vegetables and fish.
Yeah.
And then they just cover it in lime juice.
Yeah.
And then the lime juice, the acid in it, ends up cooking the fish.
Oh wow.
But not all the way, obviously.
Yeah.
But like, so acid can cook fish. And so it's just this like bowl of raw fish and some vegetables
Yeah.
in lime juice. And it is super good. But you probably won't like it if
I'm probably gonna try fermented shark, or
I've had fermented.
because I'm going to Iceland. as the
Yeah.
trip. I'm gonna try fermented shark, and then there's another weird one. Oh yeah, I think it was deer head, goat head. It was some very weird.
I went to Iceland last year.
How is it?
Oh, it was fantastic.
Yeah.
Super
It's
cool.
very expensive.
It is crazy expensive. We were there for New Year's Eve last year.
It's so nice.
To try and see the Northern Lights.
Did you see it?
Mhm.
That's
I
why
got it.
it's in my bucket list. I want to see it.
The
We won't
picture,
be able to watch it. It's very grimy.
well, let's see.
So we're gonna get like 18 to 20 hours of daylight.
What time of the year are we
We're
going?
going to the Blue Lagoon. We're going to in May.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
I was there with 20 hours of dark.
There's so much.
It did not look like that in person.
Did it look way better?
No.
Oh, it didn't?
No. So there's like a 1 through 9 scale on like how cool the Northern Lights are.
Yeah.
Like 1 is like, it's kind of a great spot right there,
Mhm.
kind of. And then like 9 is like, oh my god, I'm in a cartoon.
Yeah, yeah.
And so the one that we saw was a 3.
Okay,
Right. So we're
Yeah.
like,
you could see it.
what was it? My wife and her father were there with us. We were all there together,
Mhm.
and they kept going out and being like, "No Northern Lights." And then, like, I was using this app and I was like, it's above us right now. And they were like, no, I don't see it. And so I went out and I was like, I think that's it. And it was like a gray rainbow.
So it wasn't that exciting.
Yeah, but I hit, you know, when you take a picture with your phone and there's a little magic wand
Yeah.
to like enhance it. I
Yeah.
hit enhance and it
And
turns
just-
that gray into that
yeah.
green. And I was like, sweet.
So it was only great.
It was like you know how sometimes the Incredible Hulk looks gray but
Yeah.
he's green? That.
So it was a bit disappointing.
It was a bit disappointing, but I did see it.
Mhm.
And
That's another bit. It's to skydive, to bungee jump, and to watch the movie.
yeah,
Actually, not.
well, I mean, you're
Yeah,
gonna have to spend a lot of time in
Yeah.
the north,
yeah.
like a lot. We'll see how.
Yes.
Please do. Thank you.
In recent times, we have commonly associated the environment with topics such as the multiple speeches of Greta Thunberg. However, we must look at this through an economic and political lens in order to address significant questions onto why or how we are to alleviate the environmental crisis. Thereby, in response to the question, based on recent actions, is environmental and/or political gain, economic and/or political gain, more important to government leaders than protecting the environment? I vouch yes, due to a multitude of reasons, such as Trump's vows to revoke and repeal government restrictions on production, authorities and an abundance of authorities who don't prioritize the environment, in addition to people opting for economic security rather than sustainability. The New York Times article published on the 3rd of August 2019 specifically quotes, President Trump made eliminating federal regulations a priority with over 85 regulations revoked, 53 completed, and 32 in progress. Thereby, Trump has opted to revoke approximately 10 regulations that have been revoked on air pollution, with a further 24 in progress. Nine regulations revoked on drilling and extraction, with another 9 being in progress, whilst 12 regulations were overturned on infrastructure, whereas 1 is still in progress. Animal protection regulations have fell by 9, with 1 more in suit. The regulation of toxic substances has four regulations have been repealed on that subject, with 1 more in progress. Water regulations have experienced 5 repeals and 2 in progress. And other environmental regulations have experienced 4 repeals and 4 other repeals in progress. Amongst them are methane transparency regulations, wherein firms must report how much methane they produce or methane emissions they emit due to their production methods. And that was repealed earlier this year. Furthermore, hydrofluorocarbons were made legal again, and they're proven to be a potent aspect of detriment to the ozone layer, wherein they create permanent holes that many scientists believe are true. Furthermore, E15 fuel has been deemed legal again, despite making a lot of smog in the summer due to its methane high ethanol composition. Thus, it is proven to create smog. However, it is indicative that any regulations on it have been repealed, and thus it became legal again, which just testifies to the fact that the economy is being prioritized over the environment by the American federal government. Thus, other things include the CPP being repealed, which thereby the Clear Power Plan has been repealed, and thereby allowing for more coal power plants to be utilized instead of alternative sources. Furthermore, this is not even including the withdrawal from the Paris Accord that's predicted to happen by 2020. In response to my second point, it is evident that the situation hasn't changed for over 2 decades. As in Kosovo, in 1999, authorities specifically stated in reaction to a UN environmental mission, hey guys, you can come and count the butterflies a little bit later. We've had a war here. This is a serious situation. We don't need environmentalists here. And this is the reaction of said authorities to a UN mission on the environmental consequences of war. And thus it is evident that political conditions or economic security as well is being prioritized over protecting the environment by reacting negatively to said missions. And this was included in a foreign policy article published on August 27th of 2019. Furthermore, we've also experienced recently we've experienced the Saudi Aramco IPO the stock becoming public with the highest initial public offering. This is reported by a BBC article published on the 1st of November 2019, wherein Saudi Aramco has an approximated worth of $1.2 trillion and since it has ascended to the stock market, or since it has declared its ascension to the stock market, it is indicative that people are prioritizing the economy over the environment by saying they will promote and encourage the growth of said firm, even though they testify to the addition of fossil fuels onto the market. Furthermore, and thus it is evident that yes, based on recent actions, is economic and/or political gain more important to government leaders than protecting the environment? This resolution is affirmed due to a multitude of reasons, such as the revocation of government restrictions, authorities not prioritizing the environment, and people opting for economic security rather than sustainability. And just to remind you, the Saudi Aramco is highly affiliated with the Saudi government, which further testifies to this question. Thereby, unless it is evident that based on recent actions, economic/political gain is more important to world leaders as well. Thank you.
Thank you. You may enter. Please come in. You sit. You just don't want to work. Lay your heart up. Okay. Oh, so you were just like 30 seconds early.
Oh.
What was the time?
It was 6 minutes and 3 seconds.
6:03.
Should we start? Sorry. Whenever I want, should I start?
Hi, who are you?
I'm Sadhan.
Sit down.
Yeah.
Very good.
Oh,
This is round 4, correct?
yes.
All right, sit down. You may begin.
Global warming and climate change. We've all heard it on the radio, the television. And yes, to be fair, it's a depressing problem. It's a problem that started way back in the 1900s. Industrialization was a big factor and was of key importance in many countries during that time. However, those countries did not take into consideration the implications on the environment. And until recently, there weren't a lot of actions being taken. And now, with the Paris Agreement and COP25, and Greta Thunberg voicing her opinion, there are some changes taking place. However, I believe that recent actions taken by governments in many countries prove that they believe that economic and political gain is more important than protecting the environment. I believe this because of 3 reasons. One, Chile cancelling the Global Environment Summit in COP25. 2, the US not taking into consideration the environment when logging down trees and other forests. And India, the largest growing economy, is not taking into consideration air pollution. Number one, Chile. There was a summit that was going to take place in Chile known as COP25 in December. Now, this summit was a major stride in the forward for the global environment because a lot of countries were going to come there and talk about the Paris Agreement and its implications. However, recently in Chile, there have been mass protests and citywide lockdowns due to inequality being given to the citizens. Due to these reasons, Chile has cancelled COP25. In a BBC article on 30th October titled Chile Cancels Climate Summit, a quote from this article states, I was informed of the decision by the government of Chile to not host COP25 in views of a difficult situation. This is regarding the protests said by a UN secretary. Now, this quote goes to prove that Chile has cancelled this meet on such short notice without taking into consideration the implications of cancelling it. Many people were looking forward to this meet, but due to them cancelling it, the UN has to find a new place to host it. Another article by CNN posted on 31st October stating activists travel 4 weeks by boat to UN summit. Now, after this is said by the president of Chile, the protest led to resignation of 8 cabinet ministers. We believed that keeping order in our country is more important. Now, this exact quote goes to prove my point that people in Chile, or rather the president of Chile, believes that it's not important to protect the environment, or he believes it's more important to protect his country in a difficult situation. Secondly, the US. Trump is breaking down climate change and is adding to the problem just because he wants to increase his country's economy and Alaska's economy as well. In an article posted by Washington Post on the 23rd of October titled Air Pollution is Getting Worse, the quote from this article states, rising natural gas use and people doing more driving in the country in the US is affecting climate change heavily. Now Trump is not addressing this issue in any of his speeches, and he's not stating that this is a problem. He's just ignoring it and keeping it on the side. He's more focused on developing his nation's economy. And secondly, in an article posted by CNN on the 15th of October titled Trump proposes new logging in nation's biggest national forest. In a quote from this article states that road construction will be benefited as well as Alaska's economy. Now, this article shows that a large natural forest, actually the largest in the country of the US, is going to be locked down due to Trump believing, one, that road construction should be there in that region, and two, it will benefit Alaska's economy, opening up new developments in jobs and construction. Now, this is really bad because trees are important to climate change. Trees help in reducing carbon emissions as they inhale the carbon. However, logging down this will increase the amount of air pollution present in Alaska to a great effect. And lastly, India. India is a growing economy, and the capital of India is New Delhi. Now, back home in New Delhi, there is a heavy amount of smog affecting not only the people but also school children. However, India is not taking any actions against this. In an article posted by The Economist on the 2nd of November titled How Air Pollution Can Ruin School Children's Lives, it mentions how Britain has introduced a new no-car zone in certain areas. However, India is not doing any of this because they believe that Delhi is a city that needs to grow an economy and it's important to grow. However, certain countries are doing this, such as Britain. And in an article posted by Washington Post on the 10th of October titled IMF Climate Report Calls for Massive Carbon Taxing, a quote from this article states, current sets of policy leave us nowhere. This is said by an IMF researcher. Now, this is important because no country is using this carbon taxing problem, or rather carbon taxing solution which can be used. However, India, which can be benefited greatly, is not using it. This is why I believe that recent actions is favor to economic and political gain rather than protecting the environment all over the world. Thank you.
6 minutes and then some.
It's from 4:30 to 6:30, right?
Stick 4:30 to 6:10. Therefore 6:9.
Nice job.
Thank you. Should I do this?
It's yours.
You were point, 16.
But I'm saying it's right.
Then
Yeah, I'm saying.
between.
Let's go 6:03.
How about
Speech was excellent, it was nice, your points were very, very clear.
I actually leave it?
Yeah, trust it.
Jonathan.
Best of luck, Jonathan.
Thank you.
Let's get out of the car.
You're right. Climate change, it's a big issue, massive, some might even say. From a war of words that have been erupting, one instance of this being Greta Thunberg's speech at the UN, and other instances being Trump's skepticism on the matter, we know that action needs to be taken, but is not being taken at the scale it needs to. To ask the question, can the United Nations effectively lead global efforts to contain climate change and limit fossil fuel consumption? I must answer this with no. This is due to their inability to contain the United States in their carbon emissions, their lack of control over trade to the ocean and the ocean in general, and their failure in the past. My first point regarding the US, a New York Times September 25th article says that there are 60 countries that have pledged to be carbon neutral by the year 2050. The catch to this is, none of these countries are the big emitters. In fact, they only account for 11% of the total carbon emissions in 2018. One country that has not made such a pledge is the United States, which accounts for between 1/5 and 1/6 of the carbon emissions, according to a graph on the same article. According to a foreign policy article on August 27th, the United States has promised to withdraw from the Paris Climate Agreement, and they have also issued several other rollbacks, akin to the Brazilian government. These right-wing leaders who are rolling back their legislation regarding climate change asks another question. Will we see this from other right-wing leaders such as Viktor Orban in Hungary? My second point is regarding shipping the ocean and carbon in the ocean. Carbon dioxide often finds its way into the ocean, which raises the acidity, which is incredibly harmful and has negative effects for the marine life, such as coral, fish, and other marine animals. An Economist article on October 24th says that because the temperatures are rising around the world due to climate change and carbon emissions, the coral is dying, and it's dying at an alarming rate. The same article goes on further to say that up to 70 to 90% of coral reefs may end up dying. A CNN article on October 3rd says that the shipping industry is almost as bad as aviation, and by 2050 it could account for almost 17% of the total carbon emissions. That's roughly as much as the United States contributed in 2018 as a whole country. This is just one industry. The world relies heavily on shipping, and so these massive ships that produce a lot of not only carbon emissions, but also sulfur dioxide, which also has a very negative effect on the environment. The UN simply cannot regulate trade at this level, as trade is regulated by the countries who choose to participate in trade. Furthermore, the rising sea levels have a very negative effect on the geography and also contribute to the displacement of people. We see this most recently in Venice, with the sea levels potentially rising. But a New York Times article on October 29th also quotes that cities such as Shanghai are at risk, and a majority of southern Vietnam, where almost 20% of the Vietnamese population lives. 20% of a country may be forced to move from their homes simply because the UN and other countries cannot effectively curtail the effects of climate change and global warming. And this leads to the sea levels rising. Southeast Asia is a region that is most at risk, says the same New York Times article on October 29th. My third point is the past failure. New York Times article from September 25th states the Paris Agreement, which aims to limit the global rise in temperature to a total of 2 degrees. However, the United States has threatened to withdraw from this and has already made steps to withdraw from this and to get rid of the legislation that would cause them to be meeting these climate that would cause them to be more eco-friendly. Foreign policy article from September 23rd says that despite 150 top government officials being present for Greta Thunberg's speech and address to the UN climate change, US President Trump was not there, and so were other world leaders. This just indicates how the UN has failed in the past, and because of the fact that climate change is still an ongoing issue. If the UN had been successful in the past, we wouldn't even need to be having this conversation. So in summary, climate change is a massive issue. We can all agree on that. The future of our world is at stake. But power comes from within. It comes from within ourselves and within our own countries. The UN simply does not have the power to legislate other countries' governments and force them into an agreement, such as the Paris Agreement, which is, in fact, non-binding. Foreign policy article from August 27 says that Finland has promised to be carbon neutral by 2035. It is countries like this, countries that are making change from within their countries and not relying on a power such as the UN, that are going to be what we can save our planet. So to answer the question of, can the United Nations effectively lead global efforts to contain climate change and limit fossil fuel consumption, I must answer no, for the reasons I stated above, being their inability to contain the United States, their lack of control over trade, the ocean, etc., and the failure in the past. There's no planet B, but can we save planet A? Thank you.
I don't think one else would like to disagree with the thing that.
You're not allowed to leave. Sorry. Because you're not allowed to talk to the people. Okay, that guy.
I'm so sorry, I
No stress. In the Middle East, this means, hold on, don't worry.
Oh, I'm really sorry, I had
No stress, no stress.
I'm sorry.
I just did it, but you all didn't hurt me at all. Right, this patience, right? Yeah. That's not you, it's me. I was being culturally insensitive, my apologies. And you're Akshan?
Can I begin?
In just a moment, you want me to,
Yeah.
your name, right? All right, Akshan, please, be ready.
In a classic case of man versus wild, it is man who has to fight for his own survival against Mother Nature. But what happens when it's Mother Nature that is fighting against man? Humans are faced with an existential threat, and it is now our responsibility to prioritize. So when we ask ourselves the question, eternal economic growth or safety and survival, I see a very clear answer. It's safety and survival. So the underlying question is, based on recent actions, is economic and or political gain more important to government leaders than protecting the environment? And I say no, because it is our environment that is the most important responsibility to protect in this day and age, based on recent actions. And the first point I'll be making is rising sea levels and why that is our biggest concern so far and what lasting effects it can have. A 1st November Washington Post article quotes, if emissions were not restrained and Antarctic ice proved unstable, one third of the population of Bangladesh and Vietnam would sink below the high tide line. A massive slice of South Vietnam and large swaths of Ho Chi Minh City are in danger, as well as giant chunks of Bangkok could be washed away in the next 50 years. Now, if this isn't an existential threat, then I don't know what is, because these are rising sea levels and we're talking about cities drowning. So when Greta Thunberg comes up and gives a very emotional line that we all might laugh at when she talks about ecosystems collapsing and all we dream of eternal economic growth, there is a shred of truth in that statement that we do dream of eternal economic growth, but how can we do that when our ecosystems and our entire environment is collapsing? And this brings me to my next point. In light of more recent events, we all heard about Delhi's extreme air pollution rise and its rise in CO2 emissions. And this has come at an alarming rate. And a 2nd November Economist article quotes, Air pollution in New Delhi can ruin school children's lives. The same article quotes that New Delhi declared a public health emergency on the 1st of November, and the chief minister himself quoted, "The city has effectively turned into a gas chamber." Now, if the chief minister of Delhi, the biggest city in India, itself is quoting that the entire city is now feeling like a gas chamber because of the air pollution levels in Delhi, then that is an existential threat. And how can we prioritize economic growth or political gain over something that threatens our very own safety and our very own existence? Pollution takes a toll on one's cognitive development and mental health, as quoted by the 2nd November Economist article. And this can have an effect on children's lives. So when we try to embark, when the generation before us makes mistakes and they try to embark it upon the previous generation, they must keep in mind that these mistakes itself are affecting the next generation. And that in the next 50 years, this next generation may not be able to solve these problems because of rising sea levels and air pollution conditions that are so bad that it's now affecting one's cognitive development and mental health. A 23rd October Washington Post article quotes, "Fine particles can damage a person's respiratory system, accumulate in the brain, and send people to the emergency room." The same article quotes that Carnegie Mellon researchers estimated that in 2018, in the United States, 10,000 deaths were solely accredited to the release of fine CO2 particles from transportation systems. This is an existential threat. This is our ecosystems collapsing, and what we're doing is dreaming of eternal economic growth in a time where that simply seems redundant. Yes, economic growth is needed. Yes, political gain is needed. But at what cost? We've all learned about opportunity cost in our economics classes, and we understand at what cost can we have this economic growth. And that is not the cost of human lives. We cannot let our environment collapse or simply gain political power at the rate of our environmental collapse. A 16th September BBC article quotes, Professor King quotes in this article, "What is scary is our lack of appropriate response. Our continued lack of action is committing the world to major and essentially irreversible change." So when Professor King quotes this, he's talking about the recent actions of Hurricane Dorian. He's talking about the air pollution levels in Delhi and the rising CO2 emissions all around the world. And what's scary is that we do not have an appropriate responses to these questions. So when we ask our leaders and we ask our governments in emotional UN climate speeches these questions like, what can you do to save the environment? We should be asking them, can you save the environment instead of dreaming about eternal economic growth? So when we all scoff at Greta Thunberg the next time, we must keep in mind that there is a shred of truth in her speech, in each and every statement that she's made, because it is true, our environment is collapsing and we cannot have eternal economic growth without an environment, and that is simply an underlying fact that everyone must need to learn. So when someone asks me the next time, is economic growth or political gain more important than the safety of ourselves and the environment, we tell them no. Thank you.
Will somebody have the next person in?
6 minutes and 5 seconds.
Is there a runner?
Sir, runner? Yes.
Can you get that as a walkie-talkie, Mr. Harani, and be like, hey, Cisco is running late because everything is running late? Omar? Yes. How are you today?
I'm not so good.
You're not so good? I'm so sorry to hear that. Is it because you forgot how to tie a tie?
Ooh.
I would have helped you. No, that wasn't a burn.
Professor
It was a
Lawrence.
question. Oh, okay.
Just one.
You got this, Chief.
Okay.
There's no purpose here. So that we're.
When you're ready,
Okay. When thinking of what is more important to government leaders, the power or their environment, we must take a look at first the countries that are trying to make this change and realistically whether they need it or not. First off, the biggest environmental effect currently is climate change. Climate change is the change of the average weather patterns over time. And whether leaders or governments like it, they need to first look at the environment before thinking of the economy and their political power. Because sadly, only countries like France, Germany, and Britain are the people that are trying to make this change, but they only account for 11% of the global emissions in the world. Whereas India, and China aren't trying to make this change. When answering the question, based on recent actions, is economic and/or political gain more important to government leaders than protecting the environment? The answer is sadly yes. For reasons such as, when looking at who are making these changes, there are countries that don't even need to make these changes in the first place. An article by the New York Times on September 5th with the title, more than 60 countries set the zero out carbon emissions. The catch, they are not the big emitters. In this article, it states that more than 60 countries are aiming to, by 2025, to reduce carbon emission to net zero. But in 2017, those countries account for, like I said before, only 11%. And some big countries that are missing from the list, such as United States, India, and China, are not beginning to make these changes. If leaders or government officials don't begin to realize that the environment comes before any economic or political gain, that it is sad to look at things such as in recent news where 5 million masks had to be distributed in Delhi after pollution made the air so toxic that officials were forced to declare it as a public health emergency. Although we have seen some progress, for example, looking back in 2014 when China made a big step in the right direction in taking action on climate change and reducing its emissions of carbon by 2020. For example, these such steps like these and these changes are good for the world, but we still aren't doing enough. When looking into the role of the UN and the annual World Leaders Summit, it opened up, as stated on foreign policy on September 23rd, it opened up with dire warnings, and some of the solutions that they came up with were to end subsidies for fossil fuel, will tax carbon emission, and cut pollution. The level of devastation is they're quoted by the UN Secretary. The level of devastation was unlike any other I've ever seen. Hurricane Dorian was indeed hurricane hell, and unfortunately, extreme weather conditions will only produce more hellscapes for people. As I said before, if we don't begin to make progress and countries begin to move forward by trying to make these changes, and more countries that need to make these changes begin to do this, we'll live in a better world. Thank you.
Is there anybody else left?
No,
That's it?
that's it.
Cool, I gotta go. Thank you, I appreciate it. What if we just mute all the cars? Where are you going?
I'm waiting, I was waiting to tell you 10:30.
Okay, well, we made semi-finals, that's cool.
And also, also, you know what, the girls were on that, the one. Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's hack resources, because they don't have anything else. Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, yes, we, I don't want to.